Next, it's my honor to introduce April Satchel. I first heard April's moving words during legislative testimony on a bill that was heard and approved by the Nebraska legislature earlier this year that will help Nebraska authorities better gather information about missing and murdered Indigenous women. April spoke from experience that day, with her granddaughter on her lap, and I think her words certainly helped convince state senators to approve legislation to better understand the plight of missing and murdered Indigenous women. As a Chongu Lakota woman, she is the founder of the Lakota Tribes of the Nebraska Network and is a 22-year special education parent advocate. But she may be best well known for her 20-year career as the Midwest's only female Indigenous rapper. Thank you, April, for joining us today.
Nebraska. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All my brothers and sisters, thank you.
Closer too. That might help.
Thank you. Micah needs this. So does. I have a whole list here. So if you lend me your ear, I'd like to recap according to 19-year veteran officer's words of his version of what happened that day. Incident at Highway 75 and Lake Street. Officer involved shooting. Thursday, March 8, 2018. Now this is a update. Micah Taylor was released from the hospital and booked at Douglas County Corrections for assault on an officer. Flight to avoid risk, delivery of a controlled substance, marijuana being that controlled substance. Where I come from, that's medicine. Possession of a deadly weapon, being a pair of brass knuckles they found in the trunk. Okay? In which they charged him for having during the commission of a felony and some old warrant. Approximately 2:15 p.m., members of Omaha Police Gang Unit were conducting a surveillance operation on a controlled drug transaction involving Mr. Micah Taylor. The operation included gang officers, uniformed police officer, David, how do you say the Staskiewicz. An ATF agent, and Able One. So we're talking about a helicopter, gang unit, and if you're not familiar, sometimes the gang unit will have dual roles. It'll act as the drug unit as well. So, Taylor, let's see, Able One and officer, say it one more time for me. Staskiewicz, okay. Who was driving a marked OPD cruiser, were staged during the operation. After the drug transaction, officers followed Taylor in his beige Toyota Camry, eastbound on Ames Avenue. As Taylor's vehicle continued eastbound on Ames, Able One pilot spotted Taylor's vehicle and utilized their video surveillance equipment. So, at this point, every bit of, what is being described is what you would consider a controlled situation, would you not? We've got the eye in the sky, we've got gang unit, we've got even mentioned a DEA agent, as well as a uniformed officer. So, during the traffic stop, Officer Staskiewicz asked Taylor for his license, registration, and insurance. Taylor was verbally non-compliant, but eventually provided the officer with the requested items. After that, the officer asked Taylor to step out of the vehicle. However, he did not comply. Seconds later, Staskiewicz opened Taylor's driver's side door and grabbed Taylor's arm while telling him to get out of the vehicle. this time, Micah has asked, why am I being pulled over? What is it? And the officer tells him this is a traffic stop. At this point, Micah is not under the impression that he has been involved in a controlled buy. Okay, so he's under the impression this is a routine traffic stop. Seconds later, like I said, the officer opened Taylor's driver's side door, grabbed Taylor's arm while telling him to get out of the vehicle. A struggle ensued while Officer Staskiewicz, while still holding onto Taylor's arm, gave Taylor multiple verbal commands to stop. At that point, the officer stepped back and unholstered his firearm. Taylor drove forward, which resulted in Staskiewicz being pulled alongside Taylor's vehicle. He fired 3 rounds as he was being dragged and fell to the ground. The use of deployment sticks, because Taylor did take off. Taylor took off after being shot in the neck. What traffic stop are you asked to be taken out of your vehicle? What traffic stop have you ever been involved with? Does the officer reach back one hand, and unholster his gun? Here, the officer says that, he was drugged, and at that time, that's when he shot at Micah. Ain't no way he shot at Micah being drugged. He was shot in the neck. Taylor, this is after the sticks, were employed, whatever. Taylor immediately exited his vehicle with his arms raised and complied with officers as he was taken into custody without any use of force. 3 of the officers who took Taylor into custody had worn body cameras. According to Staskiewicz radio account of the initial encounter, Taylor moved to grab something in the center console of his car and was turning back towards the officer when the officer fired his gun. In his radio, account, he said Taylor moved to grab something in the center console of his car and was turning back towards the officer when the officer fired his gun. Radio dispatch responded by saying, "Did he shoot you?" The officer responded over the police radio by saying, "No, I saw the money." He grabbed towards the center console. He started spinning towards me, and I shot him.
Thank you for saying that.
Say it again. You saw the money, and you shot him.
According to Staskiewicz, his radio account of the initial encounter, Taylor moved to grab something in the center console of his car and was turning back towards the officer when the officer fired his gun. Did he shoot at you? That was what was asked over the radio when he called in. He says, "No, I saw the money," is how the officer responded. He grabbed towards the center console and he started spinning towards me. So I shot him. As a result of the alleged dragging, because, in this controlled situation with the eye in the sky, we've got gang unit, DEA agent. The only injury or threat was when that officer reached into Micah's car. When he held on to Micah. With all of that backup, knowing who he was, when a normal person have let him go and got him out another day, what part of that, and what part of this, at this point, was the right, for that officer's right to, with legal force, it wasn't there. As a result of being drugged, he had to have hip surgery to repair a torn labrum and shoulder surgery to repair a torn cuff radiator. He also suffered chronic back problems. I looked up labral tears. No doubt some are a result of an injury, but sometimes they're just part of the aging process. We're talking about a 19-year police veteran. I'm 44 and I feel like I got some ailments already, I want to tell you about another person's story and just follow me if you will. A 43-year-old Lincoln man was jailed Thursday after driving from a traffic stop with a Lincoln police officer in his car, according to a court document. LaPrice Wilkinson was spotted by Officer Brianna Gasson running a red light at 9th and O around 5 a.m. Gasson stopped Wilkinson at 9th and E. As she approached his car, Gasson wrote in the document that she could smell marijuana and fruity air freshener. So that made her call for backup. After telling Wilkinson she stopped him from running the red light, Gaston asked if he had any weed in the car, any marijuana in the car, and he handed her over a blunt. As they began walking back to Gaston's cruiser. Again, this is a routine traffic stop. At what point do you ask the individual to get out of the vehicle? If somebody asks me to get out of the vehicle in a traffic stop, I'm gonna resist. I do not feel safe. And especially if I were to be pulled over here with the reputation Omaha Police Department has, I'm going to the nearest public space I can and I'm trying to get me as many witnesses as possible. As they began to walk back to Gaston's cruiser, Wilkinson tried returning to his car, pushing past the officer, jumping in and shutting the door. Officer Gaston managed to reopen the door and tried turning off the car, but Wilkinson began driving away, the documents say, about 100 feet. Gaston wrote, as I was screaming and trying to get the car to shut off and then park, while she tried to get a hold of the gear shift, the car crossed to the north side of East Street, hit a curb, knocking her out of the car and injuring her knee, the document says. At that point, Wilkinson ran from the scene. A responding officer was able to arrest him after a foot chase. Wilkinson had almost 10 pounds of weed. You hear what he did to this officer. He received 1 year for the assault on the officer and 1 year on possessing over a pound of marijuana. The lawyer he had, however, was top 100 in the nation. In a code 3 run or pursuit, an officer's worst enemy is an adrenaline overload. The speed, siren, and desire to apprehend can cause an officer's adrenaline level to soar. Once the huge adrenaline dump occurs, things go from bad to worse. Tunnel vision and or target fixation can set in. Fine, complex motor skills diminish, and short-term memory, which is the creative and reasoning part of the brain, can essentially shut down, leaving an officer with nothing more than long-term memory and primal emotional instincts to operate with. The potential for adrenaline overload during a pursuit is tremendous, particularly for younger, inexperienced officers. That second story I told you about, second incident involving an officer assaulting another officer, marijuana. Officer Brianna Gaston was only an 8-year veteran at that point. All through what she had been through, she did not enforce like the other officer did. She did not unholster her gun, and she did not shoot at LaPreece Wilkinson. However, the officer involved in Micah Taylor's did, and he shot him in the neck. Native Americans are killed in police encounters at a higher rate than any other racial or ethnic group, according to data from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Yet rarely do these deaths gain the national spotlight. For every 1 million Native American, an average of 2.9 of them die annually. From 1999 to 2015, as a result of legal intervention. The vast majority of these deaths were police shootings, but a few were attributed to other causes, including manhandling. The mortality rate is 12% higher for African Americans and 3 times the rate of whites. The data available likely does not capture all of Native American deaths and police encounters due to people of mixed races and relatively homeless populations are not on the grid. And according to Indigenous Law and Policy Center at Michigan State, in 1996, American Indian mortality rates were underreported by an estimated 21% because of inconsistencies in identifying Native Americans on death certificates, according to the Center for Disease Control. Native Americans are often stereotyped as being violent, addicted to alcohol and drugs. Those perceptions, whether conscious or not, tinge police and citizen-civilian interactions. U.S. police killings, according to a study called What the Data Tells Us, which was published December 4th, 2018, gunshots seem to be the cause of death in more than 90% of the cases. Let me put it to you, and let me sum it up for you. There were 2,021, well, altogether there was 2,226 cases to be exact. Of those 2,226, 2021 was those killed in custody, which is the second leading cause of death, at least for 82 of the killings, which was slightly higher than those killed by gunshots in all but Midwest region. You know what that's telling you? were being shot in the Midwest. When people don't trust the government and criminal justice system, they are less likely to rely on the law to solve conflicts. Perhaps it's the lax legal standards that allow cops to justify deadly force against suspects who pose no danger and sometimes are only perceived to pose a threat to officers because cops hold racial biases that are endemic in the criminal justice system. Constitutionally, police officers are allowed to shoot under two circumstances. The first circumstance is to protect their life or the life of another innocent party. What departments call the defense of life standard. The second circumstance is to prevent a suspect from escaping, but only if the officer has probable cause to link the suspect poses a dangerous threat to others. The key of both the legal standards, defense of life used. Instead, what matters is the officer's objectively reasonable belief that there is a threat. I do not feel Micah posed any threat to that officer at all. The only threat came was from that officer. It came when he opened his door. It came when he grabbed him by the arm with one hand and one-handed unholstered his gun, took it out, and shot him.
And if he was afraid of him, why did he grab him?
Exactly. In a Tennessee versus Garner, the court ruled that cops couldn't shoot every felon who tried to escape. We have to get beyond what is legal and start focusing on what is preventable. Most are preventable. We need the police to stop chasing down suspects, hopping fences, and landing on top of someone with a gun. When they do that, they have no choice but to shoot. Years of life lost from police violence were greatest among younger age groups across racial and ethnic groups. The highest proportions of those killed was among Native Americans, who were killed by police at a rate of 7.8 per 1 million people. Police violence disproportionately impacts young people. The young people affected are disproportionately people of color. They took a new approach to tallying the effects of police shootings and killings, calculating and including life lost. Native Americans, African Americans are victims in 20% of police shootings. Now, we apply that same method. Black women and American Indian and Alaskan Native women are at a much higher risk of being killed by police than a white woman ever will be. In that same token, it's unfortunate that our Native women, they suffer rape, abuse 3 times higher than any other race. The Department of Justice was called to examine the investigation in the 2016 fatal shooting of L'Oreal Chisholm, a young Native woman who stood only 5 feet and weighed less than 100 pounds. She turns her back towards one of the officers with the scissors in her hand pointed down. The officers shoot her 4 times, twice in the front and twice in the back. Zachary Bearhills committed no crime, according to Douglas County Attorney Donald Klein. At least that's what he said at a press conference. Zachary Bearhills was simply a human being suffering from a severe mental illness that was quite obvious to anyone who came in contact with him.
If he had a mental illness, why was he in cop?
Huh?
If he had a mental illness, why was he in cop?
Why would, no, he wasn't. He was killed by police.
My apologies.
Yes. So was L'Oreal. She too was somebody who had gentlemen from my tribe, from Rapid City, was the same. Held a knife to his own self. It is evident 19-year veteran Dave
Staskiewicz.
made a life-threatening decision for Micah Taylor in less than the 2-minute time lapse from when the traffic stop was initiated and Taylor sped away. A controlled stop, such as this one was, with helicopter, gang task force, again, let me repeat to you in his words what he said. According to his radioed account of the initial encounter, Taylor moved to grab something in the center console of the car and was turning back towards Staskiewicz when the officer fired his gun. Dispatch asked the officer, "Did he shoot at you?" He responded by saying, "No, I saw the money." He grabbed towards the center console. He started spitting towards me. I shot up. This does not merit use of force. The first circumstance is to protect their life or the life of another party, correct? What departments call the defensive life standard. The second circumstance is to prevent a suspect from escaping, but only if the officer has probable cause to think the suspect poses a dangerous threat to others. The key to both of the legal standards, defense of life and fleeing of a violent felony, is that it doesn't matter whether there is actual threat or when force is used. Instead, what matters is the officer's objectively reasonable belief that there is a threat. Again, Micah posed. The threat came when that officer reached into that car, when he grabbed him by his arm and with the other arm unholstered his gun. I do believe that Micah tried to get away. I would have. I would have done anything to keep being in that situation. He was shot in his neck. Every bit of the accounts in that officer's words, from beginning to the end, he complied. Where was the threat? The judge made an emphasis on the injuries sustained by 19-year veteran. However, he was treated and released the same night. Same night. All this pain, all this injury, you would have thought a gentleman of that age would have stayed longer than that. Hip busted up, shoulder busted up, back pain. He should have stayed longer if you know, those injuries were sustained from that incident. I'm so proud of every one of you that is here. I'm so proud that you came to support, help bring awareness, because we're dying. They're killing us out here. We've got our sisters going missing and our men being shot and murdered. This isn't right. It's not right at all, you know. Micah, 30 to 50 years. The other incident that I told you about was a little more, you know. LaPriest didn't get shot in the neck. However, the officer was drugged, knocked out. However, whatever. I wanted to illustrate to you not only the difference in the legal representation, you know. His life was just, there you go. It meant nothing. And he must mean something. We've all come together. Again, justice for Micah Taylor. Thank you.
April, you always surprise me. Being an indigenous rapper, I always assume you're going to appeal to our emotions or love of music, and you bring facts and figures and statistics instead to us, and I appreciate that because that tells the story as well. So thank you so much.